The woman's fingers were ice against Samuel Garrett's weathered palm, but it wasn't the cold that made him recoil. It was the scars. Perfect, deliberate marks carved into her skin like a map of suffering he'd seen only once before, burned into his memory from a night 23 years ago when he'd failed everyone who mattered. "I can't go back," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the October wind that rattled the shutters of his isolated ranch house. "They'll know. They always know." Samuel's hand trembled as he studied the intricate pattern of raised flesh across her knuckles, the same ritualistic scarring that had marked his daughter's hands the night she disappeared. The night he'd been too drunk, too broken by his wife's death to notice the riders approaching until it was too late. The night that had hollowed him out and left him counting sunrises in this godforsaken valley, waiting for a ghost that would never come home. But here she stood on his porch, this stranger with familiar scars, her dark hair matted with trailed dust and her dress torn from hard riding. She couldn't be more than 25, far too young to carry marks that old, yet the evidence pressed against his palm like a brand. "Who are you?" he managed, though part of him already knew the answer would shatter what remained of his world. She lifted her eyes then, eyes the color of sage honey, eyes he'd kissed goodnight 1,000 times before everything went wrong. "You used to call me your little sparrow," she said, and Samuel Garrett felt his knees buckle. The coffee cup slipped from his other hand, shattering against the porch boards like his sanity. This woman wore his daughter's eyes, carried his daughter's scars, spoke with his daughter's voice. But Mary would be 26 now, and this girl looked barely past 20. Time itself seemed to mock him as he stared into a face that should have aged, should have changed, should have been buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in the territories. Behind her, 3 riders emerged from the tree-line, their silhouettes black against the dying light, and Samuel realized that some impossibilities came with a terrible price. Inside. Now. Samuel pulled her through the doorway, his mind reeling as her familiar weight settled against his chest. She smelled of sage and smoke, exactly as Mary had the morning she'd picked wildflowers for her mother's grave. But beneath that memory lay something else, something ancient and wrong that made his skin crawl. "Papa, I know how this looks." Her voice cracked on the word he never expected to hear again. "I know you buried me. I know you mourned me. But I never died." The riders had stopped at his fence line, close enough that Samuel could see the gleam of their weapons in the twilight. They sat their horses with the patience of predators, as if they'd waited decades for this moment, and could wait decades more. "The Comancheros took me," she continued, her fingers working nervously at her torn sleeves. "But they didn't kill me. They gave me to someone else. Someone who needed what I had." "What you had?" Samuel checked his rifle, though he knew 6 bullets wouldn't be enough against what was coming. "Youth, Papa. Life itself." She moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. "He was dying, you see. Ancient and dying, and he'd learned things from the Apache medicine men that the world forgot long ago. How to steal time. How to trade one life for pieces of another." Samuel's blood turned to ice water. "That's impossible. Look at me." She turned, and in the lamplight he could see the truth written in every line of her face. His Mary, frozen at the moment of her taking, while 23 years had carved themselves into his own reflection. "I gave him my years, piece by piece, keeping him alive while I stayed young. But I escaped. I finally found the strength to run." The riders were moving now, 3 shadows flowing through his gate like smoke given form. Samuel had faced Comanches, outlaws, and nature's worst storms, but he never faced anything that defied the natural order itself. "He'll kill you to get me back," Mary whispered. "He'll kill anyone who stands between us. But Papa, I can't let him have what's left of my life. I won't go back to that place." Samuel shouldered his rifle, knowing that whatever rode toward his door would require more than bullets to stop, but unwilling to fail his daughter twice. The first rider reached the porch before Samuel could draw a steady bead. In the yellow spill of lamplight, the man's face was a ruin of preserved flesh and hollow sockets, held together by will and something far darker than medicine. Ancient eyes burned in that skull-like visage, eyes that had seen the birth and death of nations. Jacob Fairweather. The thing spoke, its voice like wind through bone. Return what belongs to me, and I'll grant you the mercy of a clean death. The name's Samuel Garrett, he replied, keeping his rifle trained on the creature's chest. And she belongs to herself. The ancient thing that had once been a man laughed, a sound like grinding stone. She belongs to me by blood and bargain. 23 years I've sustained myself on her stolen time, and 23 more years she owes me. Would you stand between a man and his property? Behind Samuel, Mary pressed against the doorframe, her whole body shaking. Don't listen to him, Papa. He's not a man anymore. He's something else, something that should have died with the buffalo. The second rider moved to flank the house while the third remained mounted, a Winchester gleaming across his saddle. Samuel recognized the tactical positioning. They'd done this before, cornered desperate families in isolated places where screams carried no farther than the wind. I made her young again, Fairweather continued, dismounting with fluid grace that belonged to no man past his first century. Gave her skin the softness of a child, her eyes the brightness of dawn. In return, she feeds my hunger for time itself. It's a fair trade. She was 7 years old. Samuel snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. She was dying of the fever when my associates brought her to me. I saved her life. The creature's smile revealed teeth like broken glass. Of course, I may have neglected to mention the terms of our arrangement. Mary stepped into the light then, her young face terrible with old knowledge. He keeps us in cages, Papa. Dozens of us, all frozen at the moment of our taking. He feeds on our years while we dream of lives we'll never live. Fairweather raised his hand, and Samuel felt the air itself grow thick and poisonous. Enough. You will return to me, child, or I will make your father's death last until the next century. Samuel's rifle bucked against his shoulder, the shot echoing across the valley like thunder, but the ancient thing merely smiled as the bullet passed through him like smoke. The impossible sight of his bullet punching through empty air where Fairweather stood froze Samuel's blood, but Mary moved with desperate purpose. She grabbed the iron poker from beside the fireplace, its metal gleaming with more than reflected flame. Iron blessed by Apache fire, she said, raising the weapon. Some things even he can't touch. Fairweather's confidence wavered as the blessed metal caught the light. Clever girl. But iron won't protect you from my associates. He gestured to the other riders, who moved with inhuman speed toward the windows. No, Samuel said quietly, understanding flooding through him like cold water. But love might. He'd spent 23 years blaming himself for Mary's disappearance, carrying guilt like a stone in his chest. But looking at his daughter now, frozen in time, scarred by impossible bargains, yet still fighting for her freedom, he realized that some mistakes could be unmade, some debts repaid with interest. What are you doing? Mary whispered as Samuel set down his rifle and walked toward the door. Something I should have done 23 years ago. He opened the door, stepped onto the porch, and faced the ancient evil that had stolen his child. I'm offering myself instead. Fairweather's hollow eyes gleamed with interest. You're old, broken. Your years have little value. Maybe. But they're freely given. Samuel spread his arms wide, offering himself to the darkness. Take what's left of my time. Let her go. Papa, no! Mary lunged forward, but Samuel was already walking down the steps, already committed to the only bargain that mattered. A willing sacrifice, Fairweather mused. There's power in that. Very well, old man. I accept your trade. The creature reached out with fingers like winter itself, and Samuel felt his remaining years begin to drain away like water through broken stone. His hair whitened, his back bent, his skin grew paper-thin and spotted with age. But with each year that fled, he saw Mary growing older, saw time finally claiming what had been stolen from her. She aged 23 years in as many seconds, from girl to woman, from victim to survivor. Lines appeared around her eyes, silver touched her hair, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of a life finally lived. Thank you? she whispered, but Samuel could barely hear her through the roaring in his ears as his borrowed time ran out. Samuel Garrett died as the sun touched the horizon, his body crumbling to dust that scattered on the October wind. But in his final moments, he saw something that made the sacrifice worthwhile. His daughter, aged into the woman she should have been, standing free under an open sky. Mary knelt where her father had fallen, gathering the blessed dust in her weathered hands. Fairweather and his riders had vanished with Samuel's death, their bargain fulfilled and their hunger temporarily sated. But she knew they would hunt again, steal other children, make other impossible deals with desperate souls. She buried what remained of Samuel Garrett in the small cemetery behind the ranch house, next to her mother's weathered headstone. The inscription she carved into the wooden cross was simple. He kept his promise. For 3 days she stayed, learning to live in a body that finally matched her stolen years. Her hands, still scarred with ritual marks, worked the land her father had tended alone. Her back ached in ways that 7-year-old muscles had never known. Her heart carried sorrows that only grown women understood. On the 4th morning, she saddled her father's horse and rode east toward the territories where other lost children waited in cages of corrupted time. She carried his rifle, her blessed iron poker, and something more valuable than either, the knowledge that some loves were strong enough to break any curse. The road stretched endless before her, red dust and endless sky, but Mary Garrett was no longer afraid of impossible things. She'd seen the deepest magic work its will, watched time itself bow to a father's love, learned that some bargains could be rewritten by those brave enough to pay the price. Behind her, the ranch house stood empty but not abandoned, waiting for the day she might return with other survivors, other stolen children freed from cages of endless time. The wind carried her father's voice across the miles. "Come home when you can, little sparrow. I'll be waiting." She rode toward the rising sun, and the impossible became possible with every step.